22nd of May and it's snowing.
You're John. I'm Dave.
Finally, we get some real nice weather.
Muhammad Ali.
He's got a heart made of yellow barley straw.
To electrify the farm and the villages throughout the province. It was quite a challenge. Okay, the large construction crews, the ones that done most of the electrifying of rural Saskatchewan, would take on projects 40, 50 farms. These crews were very specialized. First, the stakers come in and stake the line where it was going, and then the pole crew came along and dropped off the poles and whatever hardware to be fastened to those poles was dropped off at each stake, according to the information that was left on the stakes. And then the digger truck came along, dug the holes and put the pole in the hole, and then the tamping crew came along and tamped the poles into place. After that, the wire crew came along, installed the wire, pulled it up to tension, and fastened it onto the insulators on each individual post. And that was basically the method they used of building the large quantity of farm lines. I don't think there was anybody in the Power Corporation that didn't fall down poles, and your tendency then when you're climbing a pole is to hang on. You know? You spend the rest of the day poking slivers out of your arm.
Yeah. I remember it was one of the happiest moments of my life when I got to the top of that first pole and was able to put my belt around, because you don't climb with the belt. The experienced guys climb with a belt, but if you're just a novice, you don't want to do that, because then not only do you fall, but you also rip your whole face off, because the belt keeps you close to the pole.
Right.
So you're climbing up like this, and your whole wish is to get as close to that pole as possible, but you have to stay back to keep the right angle. And so got to the top, put my belt through around the pole in the metal braces, and then put your legs straight, and then you just sit back and relax, and it's comfortable, and then you get to think about, okay, I guess I got to go down now because I've done what I want to do, and or what I'm up here to do.
That's usually harder than going up.
Yeah, experienced guys would climb with their belt and go right up a 70-foot pole, just boom, 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 no problem.
And then even the fellows tying in after you strung the wire and it was to sag and it was fastened at each end. And the old timers there, they would be tying in without a belt on. They'd climb the pole and they'd hook their leg around the pole, tie it in and come down. And I've got pictures, guys with no safety. There wasn't any safety hats.
Yeah.
That came later. And nobody showed you how, you just watched everybody else. And I know my first experience, I borrowed somebody else's climbing gear to try out the climbing part of it. And then you learned from everybody else, and eventually the corporation did have a school at Weyburn. It was quite useful. That was after I burnt out the town of Holdfast. I think that encouraged them to start the school, and then we need an education system here.
So what happened in Old Fast?
I have never, I may have lied, but I have never blown every electric motor in one town in the province of Saskatchewan, and you have. You can't even go back to that town.
No, I can't. No, I can't. And I better stay away now, too.
It's just as well you don't go back.
Just as well. I'm in the history book, that's good enough.
You made history.
Tell these gentlemen how you managed to burn up every electric.
I'd rather not tell that story because that.
We would like to hear it. I know it. Do you want me to tell it?
Yeah, I'll make corrections along the way.
You might as well tell it as you go.
At the time I was working out of Watrous, and a good summer storm went through, and town of Holdfast lost their power. So I was sent down to do what it could, and their substation, so-called, the transformers, were 6 transformers in parallel, and one of them was burnt out. They were connected in parallel. So I hiked back to Watrous and I get another transformer. And on transformers, there's internal connections as well as external. And I never checked the internal connections, and it was set for a higher voltage than what it was supposed to be. And so when we turned the power on, anything that was turned on in the houses was burnt out. Cleaned it all out.
The whole town.
Well, it would only be partial because of just one transformer serving 1/3. Yeah. And Locker Plant was one of the places, and you're familiar with Locker Plant.
Yes.
So with the motors in.
Yes, sir.
Clean them out, and it's quite an experience. So then I went back, 40 some years later. I meet this lady that I was familiar with at that time. She was a married lady, of course. And I told her who I was. Oh, yes, she said, you're in our history book. So that's
The Old Fast history book.
Yep.
Well, was it this summer that Tommy Douglas was declared the Canadian of the century?
Canadian ever lived.
And a real highlight for me was they were interviewing Shirley Douglas on CBC.
Mm-hmm.
And she said one of the highlights that Tommy had felt about his time as Premier of Saskatchewan was the rural electrification of the province. But my dad was involved and you were involved, Ted, and it was an amazing accomplishment. Like you guys went out there and just got the job done and
Dug holes by
had a
hand.
good time. And
dug holes by hand. It was an interesting experience. The first meeting I ever went to on rural electrification, that was in the mid-50s. And farmers were so anxious to get electricity. I don't know just how many farms were involved, but after the meeting was over, you had to have a certain percentage of sign-up. This guy went up the front, he said, how much money do you need? He said, I'll pay for the whole works, right now. He said, get going, get started. And he said, I'll collect for my neighbors, there's no problem. That's how anxious they were to get electricity at that time. Yeah.
At one time, this was the only method of lighting up the houses, wasn't it, Ken?
Yep.
These are kerosene lanterns that basically hung in the house. That's why you'd have a nail up in the ceiling or something and they'd hang up and shed light. But this is basically the only way in which they could light the houses before electricity came through.
When did electricity
Ken
come?
could probably tell you when electricity came through here.
In town, it came through in 40s, say sometime. But the rural came through in 57 up here. Yeah.
Saskatchewan Power Commission started in the 40s. Prior to that, sort of every community had their own power system.
That's right.
The city of Regina had one, the city of Moose Jaw had one, town of Robsart had one, which was just an old diesel engine, because when my dad was in his teens, he was in charge of that, and I think they had 6 poles and 28 customers or whatever, and they shut the diesel generator off every night, and the lights would go out, and so on. So the Tommy Douglas government started the Saskatchewan Power Commission, and the idea to put together and make a provincial grid. And then once that was done, then they began rural electrification. And so the countryside used to be dark, pretty much. I mean, today when you drive, we see lights everywhere. But I can remember my dad talking about before rural electrification, you used to drive and there'd be the isolated light here and there and so on. And he used to be pretty proud of the fact that he could look and see lights everywhere and that he contributed to that. So it was
The 50s and the 60s was the big push for rural electrification in Saskatchewan. And so it was quite a turning point in the rural community's life.
life on the farm made huge differences. All of a sudden people could do arc welding and all kinds of things themselves.
It's just surprising. I remember meeting 2 people, and one chap said to me, he said, "I know you." He said, "You turned the power on my farm 40 years ago." And that's what an important item was, you know. And there was another lady in that same group, and she said, "Your first name's Ted, but I don't remember your last name." And she said, "You turned the power on our farm." That was a big item, yeah, very important time in history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a revolution, and
I started with the Sask Power Corporation, Saskatchewan Power Corporation, I better correct that, in 1950, and was assigned to a maintenance construction crew working out of Yorkton. And most of our time was building lines, small groups of farmers, 5, 6, 10, 15 farmers. When you finish completing a line and you turn that power on, the jubilation. I remember one lady running in the house and she had an Electrolux vacuum cleaner, and she turned this thing on, thought this was the greatest thing. And of course her husband was going the other way to the barn, turn the light on. A great thing. And then when you finished serving our group of farmers like that, one of the things that always sticks in my mind was the party after.
Yeah.
That party of celebration of electrification. It was great. It wouldn't be uncommon for the foreman of a project to walk into the pool hall and be a bunch of guys in there playing pool. Who wants to go to work? And you learned on the job. There was no schools. You just, like I say, learned on the job, everything. And that's basically where I got started. A guy come along and said, "Do you want to go to work?" I said, "Sure."
They actually had power line electrical engineering in those days, so he graduated and went to work for Sask Power as a construction engineer, and so was there kind of right pretty much at the beginning, because there was an excitement and a real esprit de corps amongst all the people that worked there, from the way he described it, and good camaraderie. I mean, people got along well, had
Good
a good
fellowship,
time,
yeah.
worked hard together, played hard together.
Worked very hard.
You did a lot of that early construction by hand, even though you're bringing the day of machine work to make life easier on the farm. But most of the holes were dug by hand, and poles were set by hand with gin poles and that sort of stuff in trucks.
My first job was, the staking was done where the power line was going. This is rural power line. My first job was clearing the line with an axe, chopping out the bush and making headway for the power line to be built. And then you progressed from clearing the right of way to digging holes. And all the holes were dug by hand, yes, with a spoon and bar. And the poles were, at that time there were 30-foot poles, and they had what they called pipe poles, was a round pole about 2 inches in diameter and 20 feet long with a spike fastened on the end of it, and you jammed this in the pole and pushed it into the hole. The best time I ever made digging a hole was 20 minutes to dig a hole 5.5, 6 feet deep, about a 16-inch hole. But that was only once. I was never able to repeat that. You would be dropped off at a half mile and you'd have a half mile of holes to dig. And that's the way the lines were put in. We worked all year long. I told you the best time I ever made digging a hole was 20 minutes for 5.5, 6 feet. I also spent 1 week digging a hole 5.5, 6 feet deep in February. When I started, we had 2 vehicles. One was a 1.5 ton International, and the other one was a 1/2 ton International. And we had, like I said, from 10 to 15 guys, and that's a little cab on the back of the 1.5 ton truck, and who couldn't fit into the cab rode in the back. And that 1.5 ton truck had a winch on it and had a set of booms for setting, say, maximum 40-foot pole. And that's all the equipment we had besides our ordinary spade, our spoon and bar, frost bar, and that kind of thing. So as far as heavy duty equipment, we never had any.
The final step was energizing the line.
Yeah.
And that was something to see because you'd have to shut the power off to connect to the hotline. So you'd shut it off, and the safety procedures there, I remember you'd say, the power is off. I understand the power is off. Is that right? You'd say the power was off about 6
Repeat it,
times
yeah.
to make sure that everybody was absolutely clear. Connect it up, and then throw the switch back on, and it was all done.
Later years, you didn't need to shut off the line. They had clamps that you could use with a hot stick, they call it, and you could clamp it on without shutting off the lines. It took a long period of time. I don't think it was completely electrified until late 70s, and it really got started in the early 50s. So you're looking at maybe 25 years before we got everybody electrified. And yeah, we have a lot to be proud of.
Hi, I'm John.
And I'm Dave.
We're the hardware guys. Actually, Dave, I left hardware and I sell real estate now.
Well, that's okay, John. You're still a hardware guy at heart.
Right on.
I think building fires. That's my favorite part of camping, is building a fire and cooking over an open flame. Yeah, that's my favorite part. Being out in the open and, you know, sitting in front of an open flame, feeling the heat, smelling the smoke, cooking a hot dog on a stick. That's camping.
How are you, Jen?
I enjoy camping a lot. Other than the rain, the mosquitoes, the heat. No, just joking. I enjoy camping. We actually have a group of us, probably about 5 or 6 couples that go somewhere every year between Saskatchewan or Manitoba, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. You wake up in the morning, you don't know what to expect. So a couple of years ago, you get up at 5 a.m. and it's pouring rain, so you're out there building shelters with tarps that somebody brought, and you're yelling, and it's sort of pandemonium, and then you kind of sit under these tarps and you feel relief, and you're like, okay, this is not so bad, and it's just making the best of every situation, which is the enjoyable part.
Yeah, it's sort of like reigniting the pioneer spirit. You just don't
Yeah,
know
exactly.
what to expect.
You don't know what other than we got a warm house to come back to in 5 days, but I don't know if I would be able to tough it out months on end, but I guess you become weathered to that.
Yeah,
Like,
I guess so. Like for 5 days, you're living your own reality show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But other than we have coolers of food that we brought with us.
Survivor.
and enough refreshments, yeah, for sure.
Bye.
After I left construction and moved into the servicing, the district position, you were on your own. You were by yourself. I started out by myself. So that if you did have any problems like a lightning storm go through and burn out transformers, maybe shatter some power poles, you were by yourself, and you changed those poles by yourself, and you changed the transformer by yourself. Hopefully with transformers you would get some help from the farmers, and they were very good at coming out to give you a hand. Most of the districts were a one-man operation. If a pole was shattered through lightning, you went out and you dug the hole by hand with a spoon and bar. You hauled the pole out, whether a 30 or a 35 foot, you put it on top of the half-ton truck that you had. There was no four-wheel drive, just an ordinary half-ton truck. And there was a device, there was a carrier built on the back of the truck that was bolted down, and there was a device, a V device at the back. And you put the snipe of the pole, the small end of the pole in that device, and there was rollers there. And the bottom end you had set in the hole that you dug, and you backed up with the truck, and hopefully it went in the hole. And that's how the poles were put in. But when I first started out, it was a one-man, and that was your duties to do that. And transformers were the same thing, to change transformers by yourself.
Were you scared?
Oh, I was scared all the time. I was never very good at climbing poles. Some guys had a real knack of it. They were good, but they could really motor right along. But I was never that good at it. But I got by. And the rural community, was a great community. They were very helpful. Stuck was second nature to me during rainstorms and in the wintertime. And farmers were always there to help you out. Always. I've traveled in the engine of a train from one community to the next. I had the section foreman take me on the jigger, if you know what the jigger is. That's the motorized little vehicle that runs down the track where they do maintenance. From one community down to the third community down the road, it'd be about 40 miles down the road. And I've used team and wagon. I've used snowmobiles, skidoos. And I remember one time when we were blocked in quite solid and the community was without service, and I phoned into my supervisor and said, I can't get there. There's nobody that will take me out. He said, walk. And that's the way you provided service, and that's quite a while ago, though.
though, like going to work, to and from work in this type of weather.
So you got your winter gear on?
Yeah, we're gonna start putting on a bit more clothes now. It's not as cool or warm as it was. Okay, Donna.